In this session, we're going to take one essay topic which came in the essay paper in today, and we're going to discuss it completely from 0 to 1 as to how a beginner versus how a ranker attempts it. And I'm going to show you how, if you understand the task framework, not only will you start thinking in nuances, but as you graduate, as you evolve your thought, you'll become an even better essay writer. To give you a background of what we're talking about, in the morning session in the live, we saw that 8 out of 8 questions which came in the essay paper today, this year in UPSC 2025, they are uniquely solvable with the task framework, which I call thesis, antithesis, synthesis, which is derived from the Hegelian dialectic method, also talked about by Socrates in a similar sounding method. But the essence of that is, if you flesh out the 3 key perspectives of an essay in such an order, you'll give much more talking point, you'll get much more talking point, and you'll be able to refine your examples and then refine the arguments further. So what we're going to do in these next 10 to 15 minutes, we'll take this topic, best lessons are learned through bitter experiences, which was one of the most attempted essay topics by the students today. Close to 40% people in a poll said that they attempted it. And for a good reason, because 2 PYQ questions were very close to this. One of them was that history first repeats itself as a tragedy and then as a farce. This came in 2021, and there was a very old question, 2018, which said reality does not conform to the ideal, but confirms it. Now, second one is a bit more tricky to elaborate, but the first one, I hope you understand that if you don't learn from bitter experiences, that question, that topic wanted you to elaborate how the experiences repeat itself, and it's almost tragic and farcical in its repetition. Nonetheless, close to 40%, like I said, attempted this essay topic. And what we're going to do now is we're going to take this topic at 2 levels. One is a beginner level and one is the advanced level. And before I take you there, I'm going to give you a sneak peek of the task framework which I teach in the SMASH essay program, which I anchor at Civilsdaily, which a fresh batch of which is going to start on the 1st September next month. And the core of task is a very simple thing, that your thesis, which broadly would be like your question, is your main argument or main position. Your antithesis is going to be something which cuts at the underbelly of the certainty of the thesis, right? So if you're 100% certain with the thesis, an antithesis, one and more than one, are points which tell you that that might not be true. There are buts where I disagree. And so then synthesis would be parts where you somehow get these two together on the table and forge a path ahead. Okay? Like I said, we're picking this topic because section A, question 4 was the most attempted one. And this task framework is a handy framework which you can kind of keep applying on almost all the essay topics as you've seen this year's PYQs. And you'll figure out how you go from basic to advanced tasks like this. So just think for a moment, right? If you're a beginner, and if you've just started essay writing, or if forget even essay writing, if I give you a topic, best lessons are learned through bitter experiences, and I tell you, yeah, thesis though makes sense, do you have anything to go on the antithesis? And most people will say, yeah, that's makes sense. It kind of, if there's so much adversity, then I might lose hope, I might lose control, and they might just hurt me and not teach me, right? So these are basic question, counter question, which you'll ask me, and then I'll say, yeah, okay, that makes sense. And so I think we have to balance our bitter experiences, something with the foresight, with some more logical head, with a calmer head. I'll go in this direction, and that's a good enough task for you as a beginner, right? But it's a weak task, because what it does, it follows things very linearly, and it does not develop depth within each thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. Okay? It follows a very linear chain. It says, yeah, thesis is true, but not always. Sometimes it only gives you scars. And we should balance both, right? We should balance both good experiences, bad experiences, and should have a mature mind as we go ahead. Now, as you mature in your understanding of life, of UPSC, of the essay paper in general, what I will make you go through is more depth into the questions you've already gone through, right? So bitter experience, you can reword as adversity. Adversity is a better teacher. You should ask yourself why. And more or less, you'll get these answers that it shapes resilience and it forces attention. If you remember, and I don't know how many of you have your Mahabharata done right, but Kunti usually had this thing with Krishna that, you know what, always give me pain so that in those moments of pain, I'll remember you and I'll kind of course correct myself. Or I'll just remember you and I'll always remember you. I don't want to forget you. So, which reminds me that what pain or adversity does, if it does well, it makes you focus again. And it strengthens your resilience. And if you just cling on to these 2 points, you can look back at the history and the examples where these things happen, and you can bring those things back onto the table, onto your essay paper, and refine your argument, which is for the thesis. The antithesis should not just be that, it will be traumatic. It's just, it will make you bitter. It's not just that part of adversity, but also that, best lessons, as is the refrain of this question, you can also learn if you have foresight, if you have reason, if you have empathy, and if you've studied your history well. Okay? So it kind of gives you an alternate view, which is a strong but, that for you to be a better person or grow faster in life, you don't have to push yourself you don't have to push your, kind of your back against the wall and then rebound, right? You do well, but then you lose a lot. And the synthesis is remarkable then. Like in the morning session, I told you that syntheses are broadly of 3 types. One is the balance everything and walk together, the kind of the proverbial Buddha's middle path, right? Which is a lazy synthesis, and I told you that we need to do better. Out here, the synthesis is that it's not the bitter lessons, which is the teacher, but the ability to reflect, which gets you better in life. So if you get this nuance, and you will not get this nuance on day one, if you get this nuance increasingly, then what will happen is that your examples will be better fleshed out. Okay? And I'll take you through the examples which most of the students used today. So most of the students used example of Gandhi. Gandhi was, despite him having a legit ticket, he was thrown out of the first class compartment, I believe, in South Africa, and that kind of gave him a jolt. It was a very bitter experiences, and it etched in his memory, and it shaped whatever he did further in South Africa and then in India. You have example of Steve Jobs in Apple. I think this is John Scully, and Jobs was ousted from his first job when I think then he went on to form Next, an education/computer vision company, and then he was gotten back in Apple, right? You have example of, if you watched Kesari 2, you would know that Jallianwala Bagh was a hard reckoning for India, where we kind of lost the trust in the law of British, right? We realized that, this colonial reformity is like a lost game. They can't be reformed. They have to be resisted at all cost. You've seen, I'm giving this pop culture references so that, these examples remain etched in your memory. Partition, stuff we learned from partition. With all the bloodshed we saw and the communal hatred we saw, the concept of secularism was uniquely developed then in India. And in our constitution, there are many provisions which safeguard the pluralistic nature of society. Correct? So the more you understand that, thesis, bitter experiences, they further shape our resilience. They further make us refocus on the things, and we never forget them because, our attention span are now tighter and longer. The better you will get these examples. Vietnam War, that US had all the might of hard power, and still it suffered so much backlash. It used almost every weapon possible, sans the nuclear one, and I don't think atomic bomb, but napalm and whatnot, and still lost the war. For Vietnam also, it was an extended, prolonged war. So lessons learned both sides, but at the cost. You've obviously lessons from emergency, but now you understand, and I hope the people who are listening to me, and if you're beginners, then you understand that these examples should now be fleshed out so that they prove this point, that adversity is a greater teacher because it helps reshapes resilience and forces attention back onto the things that matter a lot. So think of it. If you were to go with the weak task, you would have a task, you would have an argument, counter-argument, and further resolution, but you would not be able to flesh it out better. You might remember these examples, but you'll not be able to flesh them out better. But now, if you reflect deeply and you make your task stronger, you will be able to shape them better. Let's take one example. The Gandhi's example. What that episode did to Gandhi was that Gandhi said, if I stay quiet now, and if I accept this as a status quo, then I'm kind of assuming that I'm less than a human. So ye to nahi ho sakta. Gandhi also realized that this legal right on paper means nothing if the societal prejudices, they run deep. Correct? And what could have Gandhi done then? Gandhi could have either fought or put up a fight there, right? But that would have further, deepened that archetype of natives who are very rowdy and all that jazz, right? Which was the narrative trope whites were using back then. So usne kaha nahi yaar. Moral force has to be much, much greater than physical force, and I need to fine-tune this moral force, this moral truth narrative. And when Gandhi did that, in comes Satyagraha, in comes India's fight with a completely apparently counterintuitive idea, in comes the eventual victory. And this is not a single one-line thing. You develop this back to back, right? So you postulate this thing which happened to Gandhi. You write 2 lines more as to how Gandhi reflected, and then what did Gandhi pursue with. And in one of my sessions, and I'm bringing this slide from an older session, in one of my sessions, I actually taught the students that, fine, Gandhi reflected on all that and brought about Satyagraha in India, but what did he do to keep the trust? Because he realized that he had lost trust in the colonial law and the legitimacy of the law when he saw that, such is the condition of society. And Gandhi did these 5 things. 5 things. He practiced what he preached. He admitted mistakes publicly. You've seen Hinsraj, you've known the autobiography which he wrote. He reframed the whole non-violence satyagraha in a way that, people who practice this, they feel that they have a higher ground. And then, things he did, almost put himself up as a moral collateral for the values he stands for, he stood for, right? So whatever you remember, and as you evolve and as you mature in your understanding, इनमें से जितनी भी details आपको याद रहती हैं, you can pen them down in your essay copy in simple English and make your example and essay much, much more denser and philosophically reflective. I hope you understand that when 2021 onwards, when UPSC moved away from the thematic essay and went to the reflective types, the idea is to see how much can you really go deep and still come out on top. How much can you explore without digressing away? How much can you explore, unravel, and put the argument right back on top? And if you go with this, as you become better with applying tasks, which we teach in our class, this is what your eventuality is going to be. Okay. What happens with antithesis? Now we saw that there were 2 mature antitheses. One, that adversity might just sometimes scar you, might just traumatize you instead of getting you to learn a good lesson. We've seen what better example can be than Treaty of Versailles. It scarred the then Germany and gave an opportunity to another person to jump on that, and rest is a history, right? What better example than Buddha himself, right? Buddha first went on with a high order ascetic path to find out enlightenment or to find out the true nature of reality. But what happened? He suffered heavy losses, right? He got further derailed. And then that is when he told that, extreme pain might not give enlightenment. You follow the middle path. Okay? The same example of Pinjar, not the pop culture Pinjar reference, but the same example of partition, you can use in antithesis if you missed in the thesis. That the scars of partition are still entrenched, and we still see that in communal violence, however strong our constitutional ethos are there, right? And in this way, you see that because you can argue both sides of the coin, or because you can see both sides of the coin, you can flesh out much, much better thesis, antithesis. Second part of antithesis, which was that you don't have to wait for adversity. You can use other better options available to develop better outcomes, right? Which is foresight, reason, empathy, or a study of history. Raja Ram Mohan Roy should be like what most people would have attempted. Very simple one. Wisdom via empathy. He was not suffering from Sati Pratha, but he saw people and he empathized with them, and he had the wisdom that this needs to be curbed. So he petitioned the Britishers, and I think it was Lord Benedict back then who kind of gave an okay and a green signal, and this thing was abolished. On the historical side, one example which I told my students back a month ago was that Kennedy, and in the Cold War crisis, Kennedy happened to get this book, Guns of August by Barbara Tuchman, in which he realized that, there was a lot of communication mishaps and top-down leadership issues because of which World War I kind of got perpetuated, right? And he does not want those narratives to play spoilsport here. Now that he knows what adversity was brought back then, he can act with the foresight out here He can act with the historical knowledge that he has, and he can prevent it. And so he back-channeled with USSR, and he prevented that Cuban Missile Crisis to further exploding. On a technical side, you can use the space debris example, but ISRO and NASA are planning, with the foresight ki ye sab nahi ho, to better. And so your examples will be much, much more fleshed out. Your arguments will tie back now with foresight, with empathy, with this, and an overall antithesis. Okay? Once it happens, the job is done, your synthesis is done. In all the examples where there was success met, you can now show that reflection was the key. Not those bitter experiences, not just history, but the agency and ability of someone to reflect on the things. And that's it. That is the broad structure of your essay. Okay? If you were to go back and see this framework, what happens is that when you end up writing a full-blown 1200-word essay, you have to write an introduction, and you have to sometimes make sure that the introduction has a good callback in the conclusion. So Gandhi's introduction, or introduction of Baba Sahib Ambedkar, or introduction of Viktor Frankl's logotherapy, I mean, these are like big epoch-defining works and times and events. You can use in the introduction and call it back in the synthesis. Okay? Wahan pe you can just mention just the thesis part. In the synthesis, you can mention the reflective part. After introduction, you have to write one definition paragraph, which I call elevator pitch. A pitch of 30 seconds, which you have to give to VCs if you were in an elevator, and make them interested in your idea so that they call you in their office for a larger meeting. You have to give an elevator pitch, which has to be a mix of the thesis and antithesis, right? So this one, this ranker level one, even if you write and reword the thesis antithesis, it gives me or an examiner a clue into your maturity. That yaar, ye banda samajh gaya hai, and he also knows the other side and the nuances as well. And then you start expanding on the thesis with any of these examples. Now here you can, just to remember examples, most of these examples anyway are historical in nature, but if you want to remember, you can use a mnemonic to your liking. But you have to never forget that you have to tie each example with this or this keyword, or any other keyword that you would have fleshed. Explain it further. Take one example. Gandhi you might have used in the introduction. So take an example with Baba Sahib's example and flesh it out better. In fact, I was checking a copy, and that kid fleshed it out to a level ki us waqt to Baba Sahib ne jo kiya, further it got enshrined in the constitution and still coming in. Okay, the constitution morality ka jo main pivot hai, it still is a recurring pattern in India, which we have to keep working on it. So that was the thesis. The diversity back then is connected to growth even now. Then you put out a strong antithesis, and yahan pe antithesis has 2 points. Okay, do justice to them and then synthesize. I hope this is clear. I hope this is clear not just because this question was worthy of attempt because of us having a PYQ which was similar. History repeats first as a tragedy and then as a farce. But also now you know that what a beginner versus advanced level person maps in the journey. So if you're not starting today, trust me, if you're starting after prelims next year, you're going to reach beginner's level and then some more. But if you're starting now, you will flesh out and you will start writing like this. Your shorthand notes of essay would be something like this. It would be something like this. And this is the power that you have right now in your hand to start ahead of the game. So I discussed one question right now. I'll try to discuss one more question, which was the most written question in the section B. Probably either this one or this one. And then in times to come, in our Telegram group or as I start the first September batch, we'll go through the other topics in this depth. Out here, I use these pop culture placards so that you remember and it helps you get the idea better. But I hope you get the drift. I hope you understand that TAS is the only framework which you need to master. Nothing else. And for you to master TAS, you have to reflect better. You have to learn to stay with the topic better. Go behind the apparent theme. Go behind the literal theme. Go 2 steps further. Flesh out things like this and then make a note of them because they will keep recurring. This example of Kennedy and Barbara Tuchman is also used when we talk about democracy. Leaders who help in extending a mature democracy. Because examples like this, examples like Mandela when he learned Afrikaner's poetry, examples like I think then there was a civil war in slavery, and I'm forgetting who the person was. I think it was Abraham Lincoln. And he used to read Confederate papers. These are the examples where we empathize that ठीक है war तो हम जीत जाएंगे, but what about post-war thing? We have to build a society. So we empathize with the other party, and in our negotiations, we keep their point of views as well. So one example, if done well, will help you in multiple essays, and that's the crux of what all we do in Smash Essay program. Okay, so this is the topic which we did today. First off, fresh from the UPSC 2025 essay, done squarely with task. And if you want to have a very quick view of how 8 out of 8 questions can be solved with the task, look at the live tab on Civilsdaily YouTube channel, and you'll see my video which came up in the morning today. And have fun. I'll see you again with another topic. I'll take either the 7th or the 8th. I'll take you to the same grind so that task becomes easier. It's slightly difficult. It's definitely difficult than those pestle and stakeholder and simple ones, but it's the only worthy framework that you need to master. Thank you, and I'll see you again.